Hey folks, Dylan here. How you doing? This week, I want to talk about language. I want to talk about context. I want to talk about user interface design, and I want to talk about a very specific phrase that's used in the British legal system about whether people are likely to get confused by something that you did. Now, language is really interesting in software because we have all these things we do that don't exist in the physical world, and we need to come up with ways of talking about them. And sometimes we invent new words, and we come up with concepts like contravariance and polymorphism, and use a word like contravariance around folks who aren't software developers, and they have no idea what that is. Their eyes kind of glaze over. In fact, a lot of software developers probably don't know what contravariance is. So what we normally do is we borrow words. We take words that were already kind of, floating around in the English language, and we borrow them, and we use them to mean something else. Now, for about 15 years, I ran the software team at a company whose clients all worked in show business: actors, television companies, production companies. And once in a while, when we were troubleshooting an issue, somebody would say something like this: the client's casting the ID to a double before firing the callback, but it's only happening in production, though staging is fine. And, this sounds like software. This is how software engineers talk. But this sentence, this is full of words like client, double, callback, production, staging. These words meant something in show business for decades before software ever came along. And the company, even the name of that company, the company was called Spotlight. It started in 1927, and that name turned out to be a problem when we wanted to launch our first iPhone application, because Apple says, on Mac and iPhone devices, Spotlight is the built-in search system. You can't have a thing called Spotlight because that's our thing, and we don't want people getting confused. We don't want someone going, I'm on a Mac, if I click the thing marked Spotlight, that's going to be like the system search, and instead they get one of our applications. Now, Apple actually has a lot of history when it comes to this idea of names and context and, what something means in a particular situation, because 1968, the Beatles started their own record company, and the parent company of that was called Apple Corps, because they liked the pun, they liked the way it sounded. And 8 years later, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak start Apple Computer. Steve Jobs had been to visit a fruit farm in Oregon, and he liked the name Apple. He thought it sounded kind of friendly and approachable, and apparently they liked the idea of being earlier than Atari in the telephone book, which was a big deal in 1976, I guess. Anyway, 2 years later, Apple Corps sue Apple Computer for trademark infringement. And you can kind of see their point. Like, they don't want somebody picking up a piece of computer software and seeing the word Apple on it and thinking that it's made by the same people who wrote Hey Jude and Helter Skelter. And so there's this lawsuit. They end up settling it. And what happens is there's a settlement, and Apple Corps agree they are never going to enter the computer business. And Apple Computer agree they're never going to enter the music business. Yeah, you can see where this is going. 2003, Apple Computer launched the iTunes music store, and they kick off another fresh round of lawsuits. And a couple of years later, this is settled for, I think, $500 million or something, by Apple Computer basically buy all the trademarks outright, and then they agree to license some of them back to Apple Corps so that both companies can continue to operate. Now, there is a really I can see how a certain kind of music fan who had never been into computers and technology might have gone out and bought, say, the first generation iPod, and they saw Apple on the box, and they thought that this was Apple Corps. They thought there was this association with the Beatles record and publishing company. Now, the actual legal formulation that's used, this comes up in the UK. There's a thing called the Moron in a hurry formulation, which is that if only a moron in a hurry could possibly confuse two brands based on, trademarks or logos or something, then there is probably no case to answer when it comes to trademark infringement. And this formulation actually came up in the Apple Corps versus Apple Computer lawsuit. One of Apple Computer's lawyers argued that only a moron in a hurry could possibly confuse Apple Computer and Apple Corps when it came to, buying music products. And it's all to do with context. It's all to do with, you're thinking about the Beatles record label, Apple means one thing. You're thinking about Mac OS and iOS, Apple means something else. If you're just hungry, Apple means an apple. It means a delicious, tasty, fruity snack. Now, context is really interesting when it comes to inferring meaning, because this can go wrong in all kinds of ways. Microsoft Windows, for decades, has had dialog boxes with a button on them marked cancel. And cancel always means, no, stop. I don't want to do this. Back it out and don't make any changes. Don't change anything, because that's what cancel means in that context. And so folks who've spent a lot of time working with Windows, if you get to a place you don't want to be, you just hit cancel without really thinking about it. But then you get the people who work in finance and deal with payments and bank transactions and card authorizations, where the word cancel means something else. And I worked on a payment system integration years ago where you could go into their admin system and get onto a certain screen that had two buttons at the bottom right, authorize and cancel. And if you pushed cancel, this thing would pop up and it would say, do you want to cancel a transaction? And you'd had to put your password in. But more than once, somebody would accidentally go through and they would click cancel, thinking that they were just, backing out and going back to the home screen. And what they'd actually do is they'd reverse the payment. And so the customer would get their money back. And then we'd have to phone them. And we'd have to explain, I'm sorry, I'm a moron in a hurry today because I clicked cancel thinking it meant cancel the dialogue, and actually it meant cancel your payment. And so the context there led someone to do the wrong thing. Now, I don't particularly like that formulation, moron in a hurry, but software is full of things where somebody may be inexperienced, they may not have used the system before, and they may be under a huge amount of pressure. And so the question is that person liable to click the wrong thing? And in this case, the answer was yes. People pushed cancel thinking it meant one thing. Turned out it meant something very, very different. Now, context can also be interesting because what does this mean? Now, some of you might have ideas, but on its own, this symbol is ambiguous. Could mean just about anything. But if we add a bit of context, we put it on, say, a white background and maybe hang it on a pole outside a building, then it becomes, obviously, it's the flag of Japan. But if we put it on a button in a user interface and we put some other buttons next to it, now you're like, oh, well, obviously now the red circle means record. Now, sometimes context can make sense of things we've never seen before. I've only ever seen this symbol once, one place in my life, and if you see this on its own, you may have no idea what this means, but if you put it next to one of these, for a lot of folks, they're like, oh, all right, I get it. Well, that one clearly means stop, so that one must mean go. I mean, this one means don't continue, and this one means do continue. And sure enough, that's exactly what it means. It's on the doors at Kastrup Airport in Copenhagen that you take to get down to the railway connections there. Now, sometimes context allows you to stumble across little pieces of language where you're kind of so deep in the context that it just makes perfect sense, and it doesn't occur to you until a lot later that actually the thing you just saw is maybe kind of weird. There's a type of technical drawing called an exploded view, which is, you show all the parts kind of spaced out. And the degree how far apart those spaces are is how exploded it is. What is the degree of explosion on this diagram? Fine, we knew that. And there is Microsoft Excel. And Microsoft Excel draws graphs, you knew that. And sometimes if you're like, way in the zone doing a bit of Excel work and you've got some sales figures and you want to draw like a pie chart so you can visualize where most of your money came from, and you think, oh, actually, I want to put a little bit of space between the wedges of this pie, you might reach for the feature called Pie Explosion and rack it up to like 20%, and there you go, that looks pretty good. And it won't occur to you until later that Pie Explosion is just a wonderfully hilarious name for a completely serious feature in a bit of business software. Folks, thanks for listening. I hope you found that useful. Watch out for context switches. They can really trip you up. I'll be back next week. You folks take it easy. Look after each other. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.